Hey everybody, we're back again for another episode of This Week in Cleantech, your favorite 15-minute roundup of the biggest stories in climate and clean energy this week. You're listening on Friday, April 24th, 2026. We've got a guest in waiting. It's Bianca Giacobone of Latitude Media joining us shortly on the show. If you don't know my voice or face by now, I'm Factor This content director Paul Gerke, joined again as always by Cleantech commentator Mike Casey of Tigercomm. Mike, how are you on this fine day?
I'm good, friend. Greetings from Austin. I'm down here at the Geronimo Power Executive Summit, and I had the pleasure of having lunch yesterday with Brian Mendez. Did you know that?
You guys were talking about it a second ago. You said you shared a sushi roll?
No, I got, it was an all-you-can-eat sushi place that Brian recommended, and they brought out the largest platter of sushi I'd ever had.
Why'd you share a roll, though? That was the weird thing, I thought. There
were leftover pieces, and he took it home. But I will say, it was one. I thought it was going to be a pleasant experience, but it was just one grievance after another from this guy. He wants a clothing allowance. He wants a star trailer. He wants his Pete Hegseth makeup studio. And I'm like, you're not even on camera.
If anyone owes you an afternoon of grievances, it's Brian Mendez. I hope you picked up the tab.
I did. He stuck me with a tab. Can you believe that? All right.
Well, that's his move.
I do want to give a listener shout out to Shamali Mudalik from Denmark. This is so cool. She reached out and she said she's been listening to our podcast for a year.
Straight?
And it's inspired her to launch Wind Her Way, a blog and newsletter where she will be writing about wind energy sustainability and policy as a wind engineer. So she thanked us for the inspiration. I thought that was so cool that she did that.
Thank you for listening. Anyway. We accidentally educated somebody. That's always rad. If you guys take something out of the show besides a hearty laugh, we always love to hear from you. Send a shout out our way, or maybe send a story you'd like to see included on the show. You can email us anytime at twictwick@tigercomm with 2ms.us. Mike, we've got 5 stories on tap this week. Let's start with number 1.
We're rolling. Dominic Chopping, Wall Street Journal. Swedish green steel startup Stegra gets $1.65 billion funding to complete a new plant.
That's a good chunk of change, Mike. Green steel startup Stegra, known as H2 Green Steel, has raised $1.65 billion in financing from a consortium led by Sweden's prominent Wallenberg family, enabling it to finish building its new steel facility. Company said last year it needed more funding due to higher costs, longer timelines, shortfall in government grants. Where have we heard that story before? Stegra building a large steel mill in northern Sweden that will use green hydrogen to power instead of coal for iron ore-based steel making. That process expected to produce steel that cuts carbon pollution by 95% compared to the traditional process. Mike, your thoughts on this?
I think Wallenberg Investments is going to invest 250 million euros in equity, taking a leading position in the company. They call it an industrial project of clear importance to Sweden, according to Chairman Marcus Wallenberg. Yep, he said it's commercially viable but complex and dependent on strong execution. I think that is a master of understatement right there. With funding progress, Stegra is set to ramp up construction, though the timeline is under review. Financing round expected to close in June of 2026. Paul, story number 2.
Our second story this week by Shelby Webb from Politico is titled Data Centers Mad Dash for the Texas Grid. What's shaking down there in ERCOT, Mike?
All right, so data center development. Folks doing that are pouring into Texas here where I am. They're competing for access to a power grid under unprecedented growth. Regulators and the state's main grid operator are considering a system to approve projects in batches. Those in the initial batch 0 would receive the power based on current grid capacity. Projects that miss that first round would face delays of years while new transmission and generation are built. Texas is projected to potentially surpass my state of Virginia by 2030 as the nation's leading state in data center development. ERCOT expects electricity demand to more than quadruple to roughly 360 gigawatts by 2032, with data centers driving over 60% of that growth. I should note, those projections are really uncertain. As connection requests surge, ERCOT and other grid operators are working to separate viable projects from the speculative ones, a massive challenge. Paul.
They're saying Texas is the new data center alley. They're saying it in the streets. I'm hearing it from the people. So keep an eye on that. Relevant to this story for sure. The batch system you were talking about, Mike, sounds an awful lot like cluster studies. It's maybe another word for the interconnection processes that they're using there. It seems like there's no silver bullet for any of this. The batch system that ERCOT and the PUC of Texas Review Grid, they're basically looking at requests from data centers and large users collectively in chunks rather than individually. When you're talking about transmission upgrades, things get pricey in a hurry. It's better to sort of disperse those costs if you can. Under this plan, the projects in that initial batch zero would be grouped into tiers based on their expected connection timelines, with some fast-moving projects automatically included. That sounds like what PJM is doing right now with queue jumping. ERCOT recently released some draft criteria for participation. They say early feedback has been positive, but some developers are worried. One developer, for example, had already started construction on a project that got its interconnection agreement from a utility in 2024, but is now told it might not qualify under the new batch zero rules. That is an example of how interconnection is messed up in this country and has a ripple effect on a lot of other things. We could go on. Instead, story number 3.
Alexa St. John, AP News. Renewable energies overtook global electricity demand last year, led by solar growth in China, India. Paul.
It's not news to us, Mike. This is a trumpet that we toot often. A surge in, that's what you do to trumpets, right? You toot them. I didn't take music in school. A surge in solar, particularly in China and India, really helped clean energy outpace rising global electricity demand last year. Ember reported that clean power generation rose by 887 terawatt hours, surpassing the 849 terawatt hour increase. What's a few terawatt hours between friends in overall demand? The drawing on electricity data from 215 countries here, including detailed 2025 figures from 91 nations, it accounts for about 93% of global demand. And Ember found that renewables hit more than 1/3 of the world's electricity mix for the first time in modern history last year. Another historical first, coal power share fell below 1/3 of global generation, with coal output dropping by about 0.6%. Mike, you have any thoughts about coal generation, and in particular a friend of yours that you mention often on the show and his opinion about coal this week that was making headlines?
I am actually, for once in your life, not going to rise to your baiting me. I'm just going to stick to the important things because I'm committed, unlike you, to delivering value for our listeners. And with that, I'm going to say over the past few decades, rising electricity demand has typically meant more fossil fuel generation. That's starting to change. You noted the dip in coal. Overall fossil generation fell by 0.2% in 2025, one of only a few years in this century without an increase. An Ember data analyst also makes the point that even as electricity demand rises with the growth of EVs, heat pumps, and industrial electrification, clean power is expected to keep pace in the coming years and eventually begin reducing reliance on fossil fuels overall, making a major shift from the past. Paul, our fourth story.
Story 4 by Ed Ballard at the Wall Street Journal, writing for the Climate and Energy newsletter, titled "Why the U.S. is Such an Outlier on EVs." Tell me about it, Mike.
Has Ed Ballard ever been on our show? I don't know. I think we need to put him on the Kelsey Tamborino list.
Put him on the list.
Right, Ed, David Wells, you're coming on the show. You just don't know it yet. We're after you. Okay. Wow, EV adoption accelerates around the world. The U.S. is moving in the opposite direction. IEA data showed a 2.6 decline in domestic sales of plug-in vehicles last year, bucking the global trend. And worse, U.S. EV sales fell year over year for a sixth straight month in March, with EVs making up just 6% of new vehicle sales, down from almost 12% in September, according to Cox Automotive. Meanwhile, EV sales were up more than 50% in many European countries last month. In China, sales have dipped since a subsidy changed last year, but they still have an almost 60% market share. So we're at 6, they're at 60. So reporter Ed Ballard takes us through 5 figures that help explain why Paul, what are those figures?
5 figures quickly. First one is 4. That's $4 a gallon. That's the price of gas where EVs tend to tip the scales and become cheaper to own in the United States, according to Bloomberg. Gas right now, right around there, $4.03 a gallon. Even an energy crisis hasn't tipped the scales yet, though. Gas in France, if you're curious, about $9 per gallon. Then it really makes sense to drive an EV. Second number, 31. That's the number of EVs per public charger in the U.S., according to Benchmark Mineral Intelligence. China has 9 per charger. The Netherlands, 5. Also a lot of bikes there. I digress. 4,500. That's the next number. It's 4,500 pounds. The weight of a Ford F-150, the best-selling vehicle in the U.S., roughly double the weight of Europe's most popular car. A preference for bigger cars translates to heavier, costlier batteries. Fourth number, 7,500. That's the value of the EV tax credit that's no longer on the table. You can't get it, so forget that number. It's number 5, 100. That's 100% the U.S. tariff rate on Chinese EVs, while you can't get your hands on them in this country. Jean-Francois Mercure of the University of Exeter expects falling costs and global competitive pressure to eventually force a tipping point in the U.S., but as he put it, you can delay it. We can delay our fifth story no longer. Mike, where are we going?
Paul Gerke, I want to go to what I think we've uncovered is a pro-France bias in the limits of how cosmopolitan you are, because you got Jean-Francois' last name right.
Well, that's something I did take in school.
But you seriously Americanized Bianca's last name. So I'm going to nail it here, here. You ready? Mm-hmm. Bianca Giacobone.
Wow.
That was very good. Well done.
Sweet. Gerke, learn lessons from the geezer.
Cross-cutting appeal, this guy.
I'm the worldly one. You're the parochial American, and that's why we attract
Bianca
international.
We were pacing well on this show, and now all of a sudden we're behind.
I could take a victory lap. Get out of here, man. All right, Bianca, welcome. Hey, you got a really cool story. Why the U.S. grid will end up paying more for Iran's aluminum strikes. We want people to read this story, but if they have not yet, what's the big takeaway?
The big takeaway is that we're going to see the consequences of the war in Iran on the energy sector in the US well beyond oil prices. And one of the ways we're going to see it is in aluminum prices. Aluminum is used in energy in a lot of things, including overhead power lines, solar panel frames, batteries, etc., etc. And now, because of 2 major strikes in Iran to aluminum smelters, we just have a lot less aluminum in circulation in the world. That's a problem for the US specifically, because last year the US put a 50% tariffs on aluminum from Canada. So now the US is importing less aluminum from Canada. It's more expensive. It was filling that gap with Middle Eastern aluminum, and now it cannot do that anymore. So we're likely going to see quite a stark increase in prices in aluminum.
How long do you think that takes before it really trickles down to U.S. consumers? Does it reach other markets first? I was reading something about how there's a Coke shortage in India right now, and it's not because Coca-Cola doesn't have product. It's because they're struggling to source aluminum in that country for their cans. I mean, if they're already feeling it, I don't know. How long does it take to hit shores here?
I think it's going to hit fairly soon. If you checked aluminum imports on the U.S. commodities website like a couple of weeks ago, you could see that there was still some aluminum in transit from before the strikes, but that's not going to, that is going to finish fairly soon. We already know that countries like Japan are already negotiating with Russia to fill the gap of aluminum that they were getting from the Middle East. So I'm going to assume in the next couple of months, but I cannot really say for certain.
Bianca, American listeners to this show will say, well, wait a second, we have a lot of aluminum production here. Why is that a problem? I think there's often a disconnect for Americans and why, when we produce more oil and gas than anyone else in the world, why our gas prices should go up in this time. I think it's reasonable to think that people have the same disconnect for aluminum. Any light you can shed on that?
Well, the U.S. just produces just a fraction of the aluminum it consumes. Some of it's primary aluminum, meaning non-recycled. Just a tiny fraction of the fraction is recycled aluminum, but it's really not nearly enough what it needs. Setting up aluminum production in the U.S. is extremely complicated and it's costly. Of course, that was the intention of President Trump tariffs, was to encourage domestic production of aluminum, but setting up an aluminum smelter can take 3 to 5 years, something like that. And it's an extremely energy intensive operation. So an aluminum smelter would need an offtake agreement of like 15 years for large loads. And we know that's really not the only large load in town at the moment in the US system. So it's really not something that can be done quickly, and it's probably not something that can be done cheaply enough.
Speaking of, grid modernization in the United States is one of those things that doesn't need another straw on the camel's back. Like, there doesn't need to be another hurdle to deployment to grid adoption right now. And you're reporting, Bianca, I mean, how much does this slow them down? I mean, we're already looking at transformer lead times of 18 to 24 months. We're looking at years out for gas turbines. And now we're talking about not being able to get critical minerals that we need to put stuff in for the power grid.
I don't know. It remains to be seen if it slows it down or if it just increases the price. There's a lot of capital coming into the energy system in the US right now. So it's possible that the price can be covered. One solution would be, not for everything, but many of the things aluminum is used for could be potentially substituted with copper, for example. However, copper is, one, more expensive, two, there's an ongoing shortage of copper, which could get even worse right now because both the data center industry and the energy industry really need copper. So I would say it's another problem, hopefully not a major one, but we will see.
Paul, we're just about out of time, so we need to go to our Cleantecher of the Week.
All right, let's do it. This week's Cleantecher of the Week is Michael Chanin, CEO of Cherry Street Energy. Through Shine On, which is Cherry Street's solar school partnership with the nsoro Foundation, they prepare young adults aging out of Georgia's foster care system for careers in power infrastructure. We always need new folks in the trades. He highlights Emmanuel, who recently transitioned out of foster care and now helps build and maintain solar at Delta Airlines rooftop setup at Hartsfield-Jackson. Congratulations, our Cleantecher of the Week, Michael Chanin.
Awesome story. Hey, we want to thank our wonderful producer, Brian Mendez, and Alex Peterson, and Claire Quirin for helping gather these stories.
And thank you, the listener, for joining us this week on This Week in Clean Tech. And one more shout out to our guest. Mike, why don't you say your name for me?
Oh, come on. Take the training wheels off. Give it a shot.
Bianca Giacobone. No? Nah, see,
Yeah.
I watched too much. I watched too much Sopranos. Thanks for coming and watching the show, listening to the show, however you take it in. Subscribe, leave a little feedback, share your story suggestions. Go ahead, take pot shots at me. I can take it. You can read all the articles we discussed this week. They're in the links in the episode description. You'll also find them in the post where this lives on factorthis.com. Be good, people. We'll see you next time.